Welcome back. In the last few steps, we played with Spring JDBC, and we saw that when we are playing with Spring JDBC, the Java code is simple to write. However, we saw that the queries might get really complex. Over here, we are just playing with one table, so these queries might look little simple, but over a period of time, as you bring more and more tables in, writing queries can get really complex. And that's where JPA uses a different approach. When you're making use of JPA, what you would be doing is you would be mapping your course bean directly to the table which is present in your database. So we have a course table in our database, ID, name, and author. What we would do is we would directly map this to this. And this thing which we create in here is called an entity. So what we would need to do is to say at entity, we are doing a mapping. We would create a mapping between our Java bean and the table, and we would use that mapping to insert values, to retrieve values, and do operations on your table. Let's see that approach in action in this specific step. So I'll type in at entity on our course class and say organize imports. We would want to make use of Jakarta persistence entity. You would also see Hibernate annotations come in. For now, let's ignore the Hibernate annotations and just make use of the Jakarta persistence annotations. Jakarta persistence entity is what we'll make use of. And I would add another annotation defining this as a primary key. So at ID. And I would import in Jakarta persistence ID. For name and author, I can also map these to the field in here. So I can say at column, control space or command space, and import in Java and import in Jakarta persistence column. And I can say this maps to a column with the name as name. And I can also create an same thing for author. So what we are creating in here is a mapping from this bean to the table. Right now, we are lucky in the sense that the bean name and the table name are the same. However, if you want different names for your bean and table, you can do that as well. Let's say this maps to a table called course_details. You can put the mapping in here. You can say name is equal to course_details. However, we don't really need it because we have the same course name. And also these column values which we put in here, these are also not really needed because the name matches. The name in here matches with name in here. Author in here matches with author in here. So these are also not mandatory. While you can map your bean attributes to different columns in the table, over here, we don't really need to do that because we have the same names in the entity and the table. So that's the first step whenever you are using JPA. Map your Java bean to the table. Let's organize imports and save this file in. Once we have an entity defined, now we can create a repository to play with this entity. So what I'll do is I'll go to our course package, say Control N, create a new class. I'll call this course JPA repository. And I'll put it in the package course.jpa and say finish. Again, this is something which would talk to a database. So it should be a repository, organize imports, or Spring Framework stereotype repository. And when you'd want to make use of JPA to talk to the database, you need to make use of something called EntityManager. So we created an entity and we will use an EntityManager to manage our entity. Jakarta persistence EntityManager. And I'll say EntityManager in here, control space, and we will make this private as well. What we want to do with JPA are the same operations in the same order as we did with JDBC. We would want to insert something, after that we'll delete, and after that we'll do a find by ID to retrieve the values back. So we'll start with the insert operation. So let's go over to the course JPA repository. We'd want to start with inserting a row. We saw how to insert a row when we were making use of Spring JDBC template. We needed to call the update method firing in the insert query and passing in all the values. Let's see how to do that in JPA. Public void insert, and I would want to pass in course. Let's organize imports. Course would be imported in com invented mid spring boot learn JPA and hibernate course, long package name. Let's now use entity manager dot. If you look at the entity manager, it has a host of methods to play with your entity. For now, we would want to insert a row in, and the method for us to be able to do that is entity manager dot merge and say course. That's all. All the mapping is already done. How do you do the merge? It's mapped in here. The ID field maps to ID, name field maps to name, author maps to author, and the course bean maps to the course table. So all that mapping is already created. So all that you need to do is to say entity manager dot merge and pass in the course. Now, before we can make use of the entity manager, we need to auto wire it in. So auto wired. Org Spring Framework Beans Factory Annotation auto wired is imported in. While auto wired also would work, there is a better recommendation for annotation. So instead of saying at auto wired, you can also say s at persistence context. You can see that persistence context expresses a dependency on a container managed entity manager and its associated persistence context. So instead of auto wired, we are using a more specific annotation called a persistent context. Let's save this. Let's organize imports and save this. And I'll go back to the command line runner. Now, the other things that we would want to do in here are delete by ID and find by ID. The thing is, with JPA, doing those things are also very, very easy. So let's say public void find by ID long ID. How can I do that in JPA? Entity. Oops, actually, this should be returning course back. So it should be entity manager dot. What we want to do is to do a find. What do we want to find? Course dot class. And we would want to pass the primary key. The primary key is ID. That's it. And we would want to return this back. Find by ID is simple. Let's also do a delete by ID. Delete by ID would return empty back, right? So delete by ID. And the way you would execute the delete is a little bit more complex. So what I would need to do is to find the entity. So entity manager.find course.class. I'll do a control1 command 1, assign it to a local variable course, and I can do entity manager dot remove this entity and save this. Over here our return type is void, so I can remove the return as well. As you can see in here, if you're making use of JPA, things become really, really simple. I would want to use the same command line runner, course JDBC command line runner, to be able to execute the JPA code as well. So what I'll do is actually rename this. So instead of calling this course JDBC command line runner, it's tying it up to JDBC. I'll do an rename. Right click, refactor, rename. And I'll call this course command line runner and press enter. So this is now course command line runner, and I'll directly move it to the course package. I'll do a control1 and move course command line runner to the course package and organize imports. And now you'd see that everything is compiling. Hopefully we have a good structure. Under JDBC, we have the JDBC repository. JPA has the JPA repository. We have course, and we have the course command line runner in here. And now what I would want to do is to just switch, right? Instead of this, I would want to make use of our repository, our JPA repository, course JPA repository. Let's see if the switch works. Let's organize imports. Course JPA repository is imported in. Let's organize imports, save this, and let's run this. Let's stop and run this again. So whatever we are doing with JDBC earlier, we are now trying to do with JPA. So what it's saying is EntityManager does not have transaction. So whenever you'd want to execute queries with JPA, you need to have a transaction enabled. And that's why you need to add in an annotation called @transactional. So let's add @transactional in and let's run this again. Now you would see that you are getting the data back. Learn Azure enough, learn DevOps enough. What I'll do is, just to be really, really sure, I'll stop this and I would go ahead to the command line runner and change the data in here to just say JPA. So this is learn AWS JPA, Azure JPA, and DevOps JPA. And let's run it again. Awesome. You would see, okay, if you expand it, you are seeing JPA in here. So that's good. So what we are seeing is now all the operations are going through JPA. Just to be really, really sure, what we can do is to go to application.properties and add in another property. Spring.jpa.showSQL is equal to true. If you are executing JPA, if you want to see the SQLs which are generated, you can add this to your application.properties, stop, and start your application. You can see all the queries which are executed right in here. So what you are seeing is, in the background, whenever we are executing a JPA operation, there are SQL queries that are getting fired. In this step, we went a long way forward with JPA. Let's review some of the important things about JPA in the next step.